Let's get back to the Battle of Beechers Island and find out who wins the battle and how a small island in the middle of a small river in Colorado got its historical name. As you may recall, the Indians realized that their celebrated warrior Roman Nose was dead. They weakened their charge and rode past the island. Major Forsyth turned to his chief scout and he said, "Is that the best they can do?" The man shook his head and said, in all the years that he'd been on the plains, that was the most violent charges that he'd ever seen or even heard about. Major Forsyth's second-in-command, Lieutenant Frederick Beecher, for whom the island eventually received its name, lurched towards the major and said, "Major Forsyth, I've received my death wound, General." The young man whispered and then collapsed. His last words were, "Good night." The surgeon was dying too, with a bullet in his forehead. 5 others were dead or mortally wounded, and 16 others had been hit. Major Forsyth had been struck 3 times. He'd been struck in the head with a glancing shot. His left shin was shattered, and a ball in the right thigh was lodged against the main artery. The Indians continued to charge on and off all day and all night for 2 or 3 days, and riflemen on surrounding bluffs held Major Forsyth and his men under siege for more than a week. The wounded soldiers suffered terribly. Forsyth's thigh wound was extremely painful. On the 4th day of the siege, he asked the men to cut the bullet out. They refused, fearing that a slip of the knife would nick the artery and kill him for sure. Forsyth asked for his own saddlebags. He took out a razor and told 2 men to hold the wound open while he'd cut. He did nothing to deaden the pain. Carefully, he carved his own flesh until the bullet dropped free. Meanwhile, 2 pairs of scouts had slipped away from the island trying to get help. The first pair left the night after Roman Nose's attack. They snuck through the Indian lines, walking backwards so their tracks would look like those of other Indian moccasins heading towards the island. Once in the clear, they made it to Fort Wallace, 110 miles distant, walking by night and sleeping by day. 2 days later, Forsyth sent a second pair. Somehow, all 4 managed to elude the Indians and brought a relief force. When the fresh column of troops arrived at the island, Forsyth's men had been reduced to eating the rotten meat of horses that had been killed in the fighting. And Beecher himself? Well, he was sitting down reading Oliver Twist. The story of Forsyth standing fast on Beechers Island as the savage warriors thundered down upon him was told and retold in barracks and around campfires all across the plains. Accounts of it fill the press and popular histories of the time. The fight itself was not strategically significant, yet the Battle of Beechers Island remained one of the most celebrated in the annals of Great Plain Indian battles. There's an old expression that I remember that says, "When the going gets tough, the tough get going." What kind of courage are you going to have when the going gets tough? Today, so many kids can't hardly cope with the pressures of life. Well, I know it's tough. A lot of the kids I minister to come from broken homes where the dad's gone or the mother's gone. There's a lot of pressure on you today. Kids get pressure to do bad things from bad kids all the time. And there's violence, drugs, sex, and they're trying to pull at kids from every angle. If you can't relate in life, remember, don't cop out and get hardened in your heart for self-protection. It's amazing how many young people I minister to that have come from broken homes and hard times, and they get their heart all hardened, and you can hardly even crack the shell with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And worse yet, a lot of kids, because they can't cope, they commit suicide. Take to heart this scripture that's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 16:13. The Apostle Paul said, "Watch, stand fast in the faith, brace up like men, and be strong." It seems that here, at least in America and in Canada, I can't speak for Europe, I haven't been there, but it seems that we strive here for the easy life. We've got microwave ovens, dishwashers, televisions, all the conveniences of a modern society. And then when things go wrong, we seem to fall to pieces. The Scripture has been written to give us courage, strength, and the ability to endure trials and tribulation. Kids, listen, life is going to be tough. It's going to have all kinds of problems. Think that Major Forsyth himself had to pry out his own bullet without the aid of any medication. Take, for example, the soldiers and the Indians that received wounds. And yet, after the battle, many of them were still standing, firm, unmovable, strong, and steadfast. Kids, why don't you talk to your parents? Ask them what kind of life they came through growing up, maybe the trials that they went through. Then remember, take courage and don't surrender to the pressures that will be coming your way. Jesus can make all the difference in the world. Sometimes the pressures are still there, the trials are still there, but Jesus can bring you through them. Brace up and be strong.